The summer wind carried her voice across the empty Kansas plains like a prayer looking for someone to hear it. And Nathan Jameson had never been a man who believed in answered prayers until that moment. He had been riding the fence line of the abandoned Crawford homestead outside of Abilene when the words reached him, soft and melodic, reciting something about wild roses and forgotten dreams. His horse had stopped of its own accord, ears pricked forward, and Nathan found himself dismounting without conscious thought, drawn toward the sound like a man wandering toward an oasis in the desert. She stood in a clearing near an old cottonwood tree, her dark hair loose and whipping around her face in the August breeze of 1878. Her dress was simple calico, faded blue with small white flowers, and she held a worn leather book in her hands. Her eyes were closed as she spoke the words to the wind, her voice rising and falling with the natural rhythm of the poem. Nathan had never been much for poetry or fancy words. He was 26 years old and had spent most of his life working cattle, breaking horses, and trying to keep his small ranch running after his father died 3 years back. But something about the way she spoke those words made his chest tighten. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching her, listening to her voice dance with the wind. She finished one poem and started another, this one about loneliness and the vast, empty sky. Nathan realized he was holding his breath. His horse nickered softly behind him and her eyes flew open. They were the color of honey in sunlight, wide with surprise and something that might have been embarrassment. "I did not mean to startle you, miss," Nathan said quickly, removing his hat. "I was just riding past and heard your voice." She clutched the book to her chest, her cheeks flushing pink. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to hear about the wild roses and the sky," he admitted. "You have a beautiful way with words." "They are not my words," she said, holding up the book slightly. "Just poems from people far more talented than I will ever be. I come out here sometimes to read them aloud. It feels less lonely that way, giving them voice where no one can judge." "I was not judging," Nathan said, taking a careful step closer. "I was appreciating. Though I confess I do not know much about poetry. My education ended around the time I learned to read a brand and sign my name." She smiled then, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "Poetry is not about education. It is about feeling. Do you feel things, Mr. Nathan Jameson? And yes, I reckon I do. I am feeling quite a bit right now, actually." "Willa Carson," she said, and the wind caught her hair again, sending it streaming behind her like a dark banner. "I live in town with my aunt. I am the school teacher, though school does not start again until September." "So you spend your summer days reading poetry to the wind, among other things," she said, and there was a hint of defiance in her voice. "My aunt thinks it is strange. She says I should be focusing on finding a husband, not filling my head with romantic nonsense." Nathan found himself grinning. Maybe the romantic nonsense is what makes life worth living. "I did not take you for a romantic, Mr. Jameson." "Nathan, please." "And I was not, until about 5 minutes ago." The words came out before he could stop them, and he felt heat rise up his neck. But Willa's smile widened, and she did not look away. "Would you like to hear another poem?" she asked. "I would like to hear 1,000 of them," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. She opened the book again, her fingers tracing over the pages until she found what she was looking for. This time, when she began to read, she looked at him instead of closing her eyes. The poem was about two souls meeting by chance, about recognition that transcended logic, about the rare and precious gift of being truly seen by another person. Nathan felt each word settle into his bones like they had been written specifically for this moment, for this clearing for the two of them. When she finished, the silence stretched between them. heavy with possibility. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the tall grass, and Nathan's horse stamped impatiently, but neither of them moved. "Could I come back tomorrow?" Nathan asked. "To hear more, you want to be my audience?" Willa asked, and there was wonder in her voice. "I want to be your audience forever," Nathan said, and even though they had only just met, even though he barely knew her name, the truth of it rang clear and certain in his chest. Willa's breath caught, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then she nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, then. Same time, same place." Nathan rode back to his ranch with his heart pounding like a war drum. He could not remember the last time he had felt this alive, this awake to the world around him. The sun seemed brighter, the grass greener, the sky more vast and beautiful than it had any right to be. He took care of his horse, fed his chickens and the few cattle he had managed to hold onto through the hard winter, and made himself a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. But the whole time, all he could think about was Willa Carson, and the way her voice had sounded carrying poetry to the wind. The next day could not come fast enough. Nathan found himself awake before dawn, too restless to sleep. He did his morning chores in record time, washed up more carefully than usual, and even trimmed his beard, which had gotten a bit unruly over the summer. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that he was acting like a schoolboy with his first crush. But when he rode out to the cottonwood tree and saw Willa already there, waiting for him with her book in hand and a smile on her face, every bit of self-consciousness melted away. "You came," she said, as if there had been any doubt. "I said I would." "Men say a lot of things," Willa replied, but her tone was light, teasing. "I am not most men," Nathan said, dismounting and leading his horse to a patch of good grass where he could graze. "No," Willa agreed, watching him with those honey-colored eyes. "I do not think you are." She read to him for over an hour that day. Poems about love and loss, about the changing seasons, about hope and heartbreak, and the resilience of the human spirit. Nathan sat on the ground near her feet, his hat resting on his knee, and listened to every word. Sometimes he asked her to read a line again, to help him understand what it meant. She never made him feel stupid for asking. Instead, she would explain the imagery, the metaphor, the emotion the poet was trying to convey. And slowly, Nathan began to understand that poetry was not so different from the way he read the land, the sky, the behavior of animals. It was all about paying attention, about seeing the deeper truth beneath the surface. When the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the clouds gold and pink, Willa closed her book with a sigh. "I should get back before my aunt starts to worry," she said. "Can I ride with you into town?" Nathan asked. "Make sure you get back safely." "That would be nice," Willa said, and the way she looked at him made his heart skip. They rode together in comfortable silence, Nathan on his horse and Willa on the small mare she had tied up away from the clearing. The road into Abilene was rutted and dusty, cutting through fields of wheat and corn that were nearly ready for harvest. As they got closer to town, Nathan could see the wooden buildings that made up the main street, the church steeple rising above them all. "Where does your aunt live?" he asked. "On Mulberry Street, the white house with the green shutters," Willa said. "She runs a boarding house. We get a lot of cattlemen passing through heading to the rail yards." "I know it," Nathan said. "I have delivered beef there before for her kitchen." "Then perhaps you should deliver some more soon," Willa said with a little smile. "My aunt makes excellent beef stew." "That is the best invitation I have had all year," Nathan replied, and they both laughed. He left her at the gate of her aunt's house, tipping his hat as she dismounted. An older woman with steel gray hair and a stern face appeared on the porch, watching them with obvious suspicion. "That is my Aunt Martha," Willa said quietly. "Do not let her scare you off. It would take more than a stern look to scare me off, Nathan promised. He rode home with a lightness in his chest that he had not felt in years. His small ranch suddenly did not seem so lonely, his future not quite so uncertain. He had something to look forward to now, someone to think about during the long hours of work. The days fell into a pattern after that. Every afternoon, Nathan would ride out to the cottonwood tree, and Willa would be there waiting with her poetry. They talked about more than just the poems, though. She told him about her life, about how she had come to live with her aunt after her parents died in a cholera outbreak when she was 16. She was 23 now, had been teaching for 4 years, and loved working with the children even though the pay was meager, and some of the parents looked down on her for being unmarried and unchaperoned. Nathan told her about his ranch, about his dreams of building it into something bigger, something he could be proud of. He talked about his father, who had taught him everything he knew about horses and cattle, but had died before Nathan felt ready to take over. He talked about the loneliness of running a ranch by himself, the long winter nights when the wind howled and he wondered if this was all his life would ever be. "It does not have to be lonely," Willa said one afternoon, about 2 weeks after they first met. "You could hire help." "I could," Nathan agreed. "But that costs money I do not have. I am just barely keeping my head above water as it is." "Then we will have to think of another solution," Willa said firmly, as if his problems were now her problems too. Nathan looked at her, sitting on the grass with her book on her lap and wildflowers tucked behind her ear, and felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly knocked the wind out of him. He was falling in love with her. Maybe he had been falling since the first moment he heard her voice on the wind. But now it was undeniable, a truth as solid and real as the ground beneath his feet. "Willa," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, her expression open and trusting. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you," he said. "I know we have only known each other a couple of weeks, and I know I am just a rancher with more debts than cattle, but I cannot keep pretending I am just here for the poetry. I am here for you. Every day I am here for you." The silence that followed felt like it lasted a lifetime. Willa's eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted, and Nathan's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break right out of his chest. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, and it was like watching the sun rise. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been since the day you said you wanted to be my audience forever." Nathan let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. He reached out and Willa took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Her skin was soft and warm, and the simple touch sent electricity racing up his arm. "Can I court you properly?" he asked. "Can I talk to your aunt, take you to church socials, do this the right way?" "I would like that very much," Willa said. Talking to Aunt Martha turned out to be more intimidating than facing down a charging bull. The older woman sat in her parlor with her hands folded in her lap, and her mouth pressed into a thin line as Nathan stammered his way through his intentions. He explained that he owned a small ranch, that he was a decent man who did not drink or gamble excessively, and that he cared deeply for Willa and wanted permission to court her. Aunt Martha listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My niece has had suitors before," she finally said. "She has turned them all down, said none of them understood her, that they wanted to change her or make her into something she is not. You seem different. But I need to know you can provide for her. Teaching does not pay much, but it is steady. Can you offer her better than steady?" Nathan swallowed hard. "I cannot promise you riches, madam, but I can promise I will work every day of my life to give her the best I can. I will never try to change her or dim her light, and I will love her with everything I have." Aunt Martha's expression softened slightly. "That is a good answer, Mr. Jameson. You have my permission to court Willa. But I will be watching, and if I see you mistreat her in any way, you will have me to answer to." "I would expect nothing less, madam," Nathan said, relief flooding through him. That Sunday, he took Willa to the church social. It was the first time they had been together in a public setting, and Nathan felt the weight of every curious glance, every whispered speculation. Willa seemed unbothered by it all, walking beside him with her head held high and her hand resting lightly on his arm. They ate pie and drank lemonade and talked with the other townspeople, and Nathan felt a sense of belonging he had not felt since before his father died. As summer faded into fall, their courtship deepened. Nathan came into town twice a week now, taking Willa on buggy rides through the countryside, or walking with her along the creek that ran behind her aunt's property. They still met at the cottonwood tree when they could, and Willa still read poetry to him, but now there were also stolen kisses and long conversations about their future together. The first time Nathan kissed her was on a cool September evening, right after she had finished reading a poem about two lovers meeting under the stars. The sky was just beginning to darken, the first stars appearing like pinpricks of light, and Willa had looked up at him with such tenderness that he could not help himself. He cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers, gentle and questioning. She responded immediately, her arms coming up around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that made his whole body ache with wanting. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Willa rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Nathan said, "and I promise you do not have to be scared. I am not going anywhere." The school year started, and Willa threw herself into her teaching with renewed energy. Nathan sometimes stopped by the schoolhouse at the end of the day, waiting outside until the children were dismissed so he could walk her home. The kids loved him, especially when he brought his horse and let them take turns sitting in the saddle. Willa would watch with a soft smile, and Nathan would catch her eye and feel his heart expand with the possibilities of the life they could build together. As October arrived with its crisp air and golden leaves, Nathan began to make plans. He wanted to marry Willa. There was no question about that, but he needed to be able to provide for her first. His ranch was struggling, barely producing enough to keep him fed and clothed, let alone support a wife. He needed help, and he needed money to hire that help. He swallowed his pride and went to the bank in town, meeting with the manager about a loan. The conversation did not go well. The manager, a pinched-faced man named Horace Thornton, looked at Nathan's records and shook his head. "You are already in debt up to your ears, Jameson," he said. "I cannot give you more money when you have not paid back what you owe. But if I could just hire one good hand, I could get the ranch turning a profit again," Nathan argued. "I could pay you back double what I owe." "And if you fail, the bank is out even more money," Thornton said coldly. "The answer is no." Nathan left the bank feeling defeated, his dreams of proposing to Willa slipping further out of reach. He could not ask her to marry him and bring her to a failing ranch. She deserved better than that. She deserved security and comfort and a husband who could actually take care of her. He must have looked as miserable as he felt because, when he met Willa at the cottonwood tree that afternoon, she immediately set down her book and came to him. "What is wrong?" she asked, her hands cupping his face. He told her everything. About the bank, about his fears, about feeling like he was not good enough for her. Willa listened quietly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Nathan Jameson, you listen to me," she said when he finished. "I do not care about your ranch or how much money you have. I care about you. I fell in love with the man who stopped to listen to poetry on the wind. The man who has shown up every day since, no matter how tired or busy he was. That is the man I want to marry, with or without a successful ranch. But I want to give you more, Nathan said desperately. You deserve more. I deserve to be loved, and you do that better than anyone ever has, Willa said firmly. Everything else we can figure out together. Together, Nathan repeated, and the word settled something in his chest. Together, Willa confirmed. Now, are you going to propose to me properly, or do I have to do it myself? Nathan could not help but laugh, even through his frustration and worry. He dropped to one knee right there in the grass, taking her hand in his. Willa Carson, will you marry me? He asked. I cannot promise you wealth or an easy life, but I can promise you all the love I have, for as long as I live. Yes, Willa said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he kissed her with all the emotion he had been holding back, and she kissed him back just as fiercely. They decided to get married in November, a small ceremony at the church with just Aunt Martha and a few close friends in attendance. Willa would continue teaching through the end of the school year, and then she would move out to the ranch with Nathan. It was not a perfect plan, but it was their plan, and that was all that mattered. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a flurry of activity. Aunt Martha insisted on making Willa a proper wedding dress, spending her evenings sewing by lamplight. Nathan worked on fixing up the ranch house, patching holes in the roof and walls, building new furniture for Willa to use. He wanted everything to be as nice as possible for her, even if he could not give her the grand life she deserved. One afternoon in late October, while Nathan was in town buying supplies, he ran into a man he had known years ago, back when his father was still alive. Samuel Fletcher was a cattle buyer who traveled between Kansas and Texas, and he remembered Nathan's father as an honest man who raised quality stock. I heard you took over your father's place, Samuel said, shaking Nathan's hand. How is it going? It has been rough, Nathan admitted. I am trying to build it back up, but it is slow going. I might be able to help with that, Samuel said thoughtfully. I am looking for reliable suppliers for a new contract I have got with the rail yards in Kansas City. If you can get me 20 head of good cattle by spring, I will pay you top dollar, and if the quality is there, we can make it a regular arrangement. Nathan felt hope flare in his chest. I can do that. I will do that. Good man, Samuel said, clapping him on the shoulder. I will draw up the paperwork and send it out to you. Just keep doing what your father taught you, and you will do fine. Nathan rode back to the ranch feeling like he could fly. This was the opportunity he needed, the chance to turn things around. With the money from the cattle sale, he could pay off his debts and start to build something real. He could give Willa the life he wanted to give her. He told her the good news that evening, and she threw her arms around him, laughing with joy. I told you we would figure it out together, she said. You were right, Nathan admitted. You are always right. I am going to remind you that you said that, Willa teased, and he kissed her until they were both breathless. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the ground and the sky a brilliant blue. Willa looked beautiful in her simple white dress, her dark hair pinned up with flowers that Aunt Martha had carefully preserved from the summer. Nathan wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, and tried not to shake as he stood at the altar waiting for his bride. When Willa walked down the aisle, everything else faded away. There was only her, only this moment, only the overwhelming love that filled every corner of his being. They said their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through good times and bad, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with every ounce of tenderness he possessed. The small reception at Aunt Martha's boarding house was filled with laughter and good food. The townspeople who had come brought gifts, practical things like quilts and cookware that would be useful in their new life together. Aunt Martha cried openly, hugging Willa tight and whispering something in her ear that made Willa cry too. Nathan shook hands until his arm was sore, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people he barely knew. As the sun began to set, Nathan helped Willa into the wagon, her belongings packed carefully in the back along with the wedding gifts. Aunt Martha stood on the porch, waving as they pulled away, and Nathan saw Willa wipe tears from her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, covering her hand with his. "I am perfect," Willa said, smiling through her tears. "I am just saying goodbye to one life and hello to another." The ranch house looked warm and inviting as they approached, lamplight glowing through the windows. Nathan had spent the previous evening making sure everything was clean and ready, building up the fire in the hearth and putting fresh linens on the bed. He helped Willa down from the wagon and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing as he almost tripped on the door frame. Inside, Willa looked around with wide eyes, taking in the space that was now her home. Nathan had tried to make it nice, putting wildflowers in a jar on the table and laying out the colorful quilt that had been a wedding gift from one of the church ladies. The fire crackled cheerfully, warming the room, and through the window the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "It is perfect," Willa said, turning to look at him. "It is home." Nathan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Home," he repeated, and the word had never sounded better. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Nathan had never felt so connected to another person, so completely seen and accepted. Willa was everything he had ever wanted, and things he had not even known to want. And when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, he sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force had led him to that clearing to hear her reading poetry to the wind. The next few months were an adjustment for both of them. Willa continued to ride into town 3 days a week to teach, while Nathan worked the ranch from dawn to dusk. They fell into a rhythm, learning each other's habits and quirks, figuring out how to navigate disagreements and celebrations, and the everyday mundane tasks of building a life together. Willa kept reading poetry, sometimes at the cottonwood tree when the weather was good, but more often in the evenings by the fire. Nathan would work on mending tack or sharpening tools while he listened to her voice weaving words into something beautiful. Sometimes she would ask him what he thought about a particular poem, and he would give his honest opinion, which often made her laugh but sometimes sparked interesting conversations about meaning and interpretation. Winter came hard that year, with heavy snows and bitter cold. Nathan worked tirelessly to keep the cattle fed and safe, often coming in after dark so exhausted he could barely eat dinner before falling asleep. Willa would wait up for him, keeping the food warm and the fire burning, and no matter how tired he was, Nathan always felt his heart lift when he saw her sitting by the hearth with a book in her lap. One particularly brutal night in January, Nathan came home to find Willa upset. She was pacing the small kitchen, her face flushed and her eyes bright with tears. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, forgetting his own exhaustion. "Mr. Patterson came by the schoolhouse today," she said, her voice shaking. "He said the school board has decided they do not want a married woman teaching. They want to hire a man instead." Nathan felt anger surge through him. "They cannot do that. You are the best teacher those kids have ever had." "They can do whatever they want," Willa said bitterly. "I am just a woman. They think now that I am married, my place is at home, not in the classroom." Nathan pulled her into his arms, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. "We will figure this out," he said. "You do not have to stop teaching if you do not want to." "What choice do I have?" Willa asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "We will find a choice," Nathan promised. Even though he had no idea what that choice might be, they talked late into the night, trying to come up with solutions. The teaching salary had been important, helping them buy supplies and save a little money for the future. Without it, things would be even tighter. But more than the money, Nathan hated seeing Willa lose something she loved. Teaching was part of who she was, and he would not let some small-minded school board take that away from her. The next day, he rode into town and went to see the head of the school board, a rancher named George Patterson. Nathan kept his temper in check as he made his case, arguing that Willa's marital status had no bearing on her ability to teach children to read and write and do arithmetic. "It is not about her ability," Patterson said uncomfortably. "It is about appearances. People talk, Jameson. They say it is not proper for a married woman to be working when she should be home tending to her husband and her own children." "My wife does tend to me," Nathan said through gritted teeth. "And when we have children, she will tend to them too. But right now, she is teaching children who need her. That should be what matters." "I am sorry, but the decision has been made," Patterson said, standing to indicate the conversation was over. Nathan left feeling furious and helpless. On his way out of town, he stopped by Aunt Martha's boarding house, hoping she might have some advice. The older woman listened to his story with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said slowly, "I have been thinking about expanding the boarding house. Business has been good, and I could use help managing it all. Willa has a head for numbers and a way with people. If she wanted, she could work with me. It would not be teaching, but it would be work, and she would be good at it." It was not the solution Nathan had been hoping for, but it was something. He thanked Aunt Martha and rode home to tell Willa. She was quiet when he explained the offer, staring into the fire with a distant expression. "I love teaching," she finally said, "but maybe this is a sign that it is time to try something new. And working with Aunt Martha would mean I could still contribute, still use my mind and not just sit home waiting for you to return each day." "You do whatever makes you happy," Nathan said. "That is all I care about." Willa took the job with Aunt Martha, and though Nathan could see the sadness in her eyes when she passed the schoolhouse, she threw herself into the work with characteristic determination. She helped manage the books, greeted guests, and even did some cooking when the boarding house was full. Aunt Martha was true to her word, paying Willa fairly and treating her more like a partner than an employee. As winter gave way to spring, Nathan focused on preparing for the cattle sale that Samuel Fletcher had arranged. He worked harder than he ever had, making sure each animal was in prime condition, healthy and well-fed. Willa helped when she could, though Nathan tried to keep her away from the heavier work. She would bring him lunch in the fields, and they would sit together in the grass, talking and laughing like they used to at the cottonwood tree. "You miss it?" Nathan asked one day. "The poetry, the reading aloud." "I still read," Willa said, "just mostly to you now in the evenings." "But do you miss reading to the wind?" he pressed. "Before I came along and changed everything," Willa looked at him with such love that it took his breath away. "You did not change everything. You became everything, and I would choose you over 1,000 afternoons alone with my poems." Nathan kissed her then, long and deep, tasting the sweetness of her mouth and feeling the warmth of the spring sun on his back. Life was not easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but moments like this made every struggle worth it. In April, Samuel Fletcher arrived to inspect the cattle Nathan had prepared for sale. He walked among the herd with a critical eye, checking teeth and hooves and overall condition. Nathan held his breath, praying that his work had been good enough. When Samuel finally turned to him with a smile, Nathan felt weak with relief. "Your father trained you well," Samuel said, shaking Nathan's hand. "These are fine animals. I will take all 20, and I will be back in the fall for another batch if you can manage it." The payment was more than Nathan had dared to hope for. He immediately rode into town and paid off his debt at the bank, savoring the look of surprise on Horace Thornton's face. Then he bought supplies, including materials to build a proper chicken coop and expand the small barn. There was even enough left over to put some money away for emergencies and maybe, just maybe, to start thinking about a future that included children. When he got home and told Willa the news, she cried happy tears and kissed him until they were both dizzy. That night, they celebrated with a simple dinner and dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear. Nathan held his wife close, swaying to the rhythm of their heartbeats, and thought about how far they had come from that first afternoon at the cottonwood tree. Summer arrived with its heat and long days. Nathan hired a young man named Thomas to help with the ranch work, a kid of about 19 who was strong and willing to learn. With the extra help, Nathan found he had more time to spend with Willa, and they made the most of it. They went on picnics, rode out to the creek to swim in the cool water, and spent lazy Sunday afternoons reading together under the shade of the big oak tree in their yard. In July, Willa started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, she brushed it off as something she ate, but when it continued for over a week, Aunt Martha pulled her aside during one of her work days at the boarding house. "Willa, dear," Aunt Martha said gently, "have you considered that you might be expecting?" The possibility had not even occurred to Willa, but once her aunt said it, everything clicked into place. The nausea, the fatigue, the way her emotions seemed closer to the surface than usual. She felt a rush of excitement and fear all at once. The doctor confirmed it a few days later. Willa was about 2 months along, which meant the baby would come sometime in late winter or early spring. She rode home with the news sitting like a bird in her chest, fluttering and uncertain. She wanted to tell Nathan right away, but she also wanted to make the moment special, something they would both remember forever. She waited until that evening, when they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nathan had his arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "Nathan," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked down at her, his eyes curious. "What is it?" "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. For a moment he just stared at her as if the words had not quite registered. Then his eyes went wide, his mouth falling open in shock. "A baby! We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Willa said, starting to smile at his reaction. Nathan let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down with a worried look. "Sorry, should I not be doing that? Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" Willa laughed, touching his face. "We are both fine. And yes, you can still hug me." He pulled her close again, more carefully this time, burying his face in her hair. "I am going to be a father," he whispered, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Willa said. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick often, especially in the first few months, and she tired more easily than before. She had to cut back on her hours at the boarding house, much to her frustration. Nathan hovered over her constantly, worrying about everything from what she ate to how much she was lifting. Willa found it both endearing and exasperating, but she could not fault him for caring so much. As her belly grew and the baby became more real, they spent evenings planning for the future. Nathan built a cradle from wood he had been saving, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Willa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as her mind wandered to what their child would be like. Would they have Nathan's dark hair or her lighter coloring? His quiet strength or her love of words? "I hope the baby loves poetry like you do," Nathan said one night, his hand resting on her swollen stomach. "I hope the baby loves the land like you do," Willa replied. "Maybe they will love both," Nathan said. "The best of each of us." Winter settled over the ranch again, and this time Willa stayed home entirely. The roads were too dangerous to risk traveling, especially in her condition. She filled her days with reading, sewing, and helping with light chores around the house. Nathan would come in from his work and find her sitting by the fire, her hands resting on her belly, talking softly to the baby growing inside her. Sometimes he would join her, pressing his ear against her stomach and laughing when he felt the baby kick. In late February, on a cold night when the wind howled around the house and snow fell thick and fast, Willa went into labor. Nathan rode through the storm to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The next hours were the longest and most terrifying of Nathan's life. He paced the kitchen while Mrs. Henderson worked in the bedroom, every cry from Willa sending a spike of fear through his heart. Just before dawn, when Nathan was about ready to break down the door, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and indignant, cutting through the quiet house. Mrs. Henderson opened the door with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Jameson," she said. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is fine, though she is exhausted." Nathan pushed past her and into the bedroom. Willa was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale, but she was smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and when she pulled back the fabric, Nathan saw his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Nathan had ever seen, apart from his wife. "Hello, little one," Nathan whispered, reaching out to touch the impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb and Nathan felt tears stream down his face. "Hello." "What should we name him?" Willa asked, her voice hoarse. They had discussed names for months but had never been able to settle on one. Now, looking at their son, Nathan knew exactly what felt right. "Jacob," he said, "after my father." "Jacob Jameson," Willa repeated, testing the sound. "It is perfect." Mrs. Henderson stayed for a few days to help Willa recover and teach them the basics of caring for a newborn. Those first days were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Jacob cried often, demanding to be fed or changed or simply held. Nathan learned how to change diapers, how to swaddle the baby tightly, how to walk the floor at 2 in the morning singing off-key lullabies. Willa learned to nurse to soothe, to function on almost no sleep while still managing to smile and laugh at Nathan's increasingly frazzled state. When Mrs. Henderson finally left, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy, Nathan and Willa looked at each other across the kitchen table with identical expressions of panic and joy. "We did it," Willa said. "We are actually parents." "We are actually parents," Nathan repeated, and then they both started laughing, giddy with exhaustion and love. Aunt Martha came to visit as soon as the weather cleared, bringing food and baby clothes and endless advice. She cried when she held Jacob for the first time, and Nathan was startled to realize that this stern woman had a soft heart hidden beneath all that practical exterior. "He looks like you," Aunt Martha told Nathan, "but he has Willa's eyes." Nathan peered at his son, trying to see it. Jacob's eyes were still that indeterminate newborn blue, but there was something about the shape of them, the way they looked up at the world with curiosity and wonder, that reminded him of Willa. As winter thawed into spring, the ranch came back to life. Nathan worked harder than ever, driven by the knowledge that he was now providing for not just himself and Willa, but for Jacob too. Thomas, the hired hand, had proven himself reliable and skilled, and Nathan gave him more responsibilities, which freed Nathan up to spend more time with his growing family. Jacob was an easy baby, all things considered. He slept reasonably well, ate enthusiastically, and was generally happy as long as he was being held. Nathan would carry him around the ranch sometimes, showing him the horses and cattle and chickens, talking to him about the work that needed to be done, and the legacy he was building for his son. Jacob would stare up at him with those serious eyes, and Nathan would feel his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. Willa, meanwhile, had discovered that she could balance motherhood and her love of poetry in ways she had not expected. She would read aloud to Jacob while she nursed him, her voice soft and rhythmic. As the baby grew, she started taking him to the cottonwood tree on nice days, settling him on a blanket while she read to the wind like she used to. Nathan would join them sometimes, and they would be a family of 3 in the clearing where their love story had begun. Summer brought another successful cattle sale. Samuel Fletcher returned as promised, impressed with the quality of Nathan's herd and eager to expand their arrangement. The money was good, better than the year before, and Nathan was finally starting to feel like the ranch was becoming stable, even profitable. He paid Thomas well and started setting aside money for Jacob's future, imagining sending his son to school, maybe even to university if that was what Jacob wanted. On a warm afternoon in June, Nathan came home early from working the north pasture. He had been thinking about Willa all day, about how hard she worked taking care of Jacob and managing the household, about how much he loved her and how lucky he was to have her in his life. He wanted to do something special for her, to remind her that she was more than just a mother and a wife, that she was still the woman who had read poetry to the wind and captured his heart. He found her in the yard, hanging laundry while Jacob napped in a basket nearby. She looked beautiful in the sunlight, her hair escaping from its bun and her cheeks flushed from the heat. She did not notice him at first, and he took a moment just to watch her, to appreciate the grace in her movements and the quiet strength in her bearing. "Willa," he said finally, and she turned with a smile. "You are home early." "I wanted to surprise you," Nathan said, walking over to her. "I thought we could go to the cottonwood tree this evening, just the 2 of us." Aunt Martha agreed to watch Jacob for a few hours. Willa's face lit up. "Really? Really? I know things have been busy and we have not had much time just for us. I miss it. I miss you." "I am right here," Willa said, but she was smiling. "You know what I mean," Nathan said, pulling her close. "I miss the way we used to be, before the ranch and the baby and all the responsibilities. I miss just being with you." "I miss that too," Willa admitted, resting her head on his chest. That evening, after Aunt Martha arrived and they had settled Jacob with his grandmother, Nathan and Willa rode out to the cottonwood tree together. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and red. The clearing was exactly as Nathan remembered it, the grass long and green, the old tree standing like a sentinel. Willa dismounted and walked to the spot where she used to stand to read, turning to face Nathan with a nostalgic smile. "This is where it all began," she said softly. "This is where I fell in love with you," Nathan agreed, coming to stand beside her. "Do you remember what I said that first day? You said you wanted to be my audience forever." "I did, and I still do." He took her hands in his, looking into her eyes. "Everything we have built together, the ranch, the marriage, Jacob, it all started here with you reading poetry to the wind and me being foolish enough to stop and listen. I would not change a single moment of it." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "Neither would I. Will you read for me?" Nathan asked. "Like you used to." Willa had not brought her book, but it did not matter. She had memorized dozens of poems over the years, carrying them in her heart the way some people carried prayers. She closed her eyes and began to speak, and her voice was just as beautiful as it had been that first day, weaving words into magic. The poem was about enduring love, about two people finding each other against all odds and building a life together through joy and hardship. As she spoke, the wind picked up, catching her hair and making the grass ripple around them like waves. Nathan listened with his whole heart, the same way he always had, and when she finished, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the love he had been accumulating since that fateful August afternoon 3 years ago. They stayed at the cottonwood tree until the stars came out, talking and laughing and remembering all the moments that had led them to this place. When they finally rode back to the ranch, Nathan felt renewed, reconnected not just to Willa, but to the man he had been when he first heard her voice on the wind. The years that followed were full and rich. Jacob grew into a curious, bright-eyed toddler who loved exploring the ranch and listening to his mother read stories. Nathan's herd expanded, and he hired another hand to help Thomas manage the increased workload. Willa eventually returned to the boarding house part-time, helping Aunt Martha a few days a week when Nathan was home to watch Jacob. They found a rhythm that worked for them, balancing work and family and the quiet moments that kept their marriage strong. When Jacob was 4, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a shock and more of a joyful confirmation of the life they were building together. Nathan was just as excited as he had been the first time, maybe more so because he now knew what an incredible gift it was to be a father. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born on a crisp October morning in 1883. She had Willa's light hair and Nathan's stubborn chin, and from the moment she entered the world, she made her presence known with lusty cries and an imperious attitude. Jacob was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding times. Willa managed the chaos with her usual grace, and Nathan marveled at how their family had grown and changed. Life on the ranch continued to improve. Nathan's partnership with Samuel Fletcher proved lucrative and stable, providing steady income that allowed them to make improvements to the house and property. They added on a room for the children, built a proper schoolhouse on the property so Willa could teach Jacob and Grace at home, and even bought a small piano that Willa had always dreamed of owning. She taught herself to play in the evenings after the children were in bed, filling the house with music that blended beautifully with her poetry readings. Aunt Martha became a fixture in their lives, visiting often and doting on her great niece and nephew. She softened even more as she aged, showing affection that she had kept tightly controlled when Willa was younger. Nathan came to love her like a mother, grateful for the way she had raised Willa and for her continued support of their family. As the children grew, Nathan made sure to teach them about the land, about the work it took to run a ranch, about the importance of treating animals with respect and care. Jacob took to it naturally, following his father around with eager questions and small helping hands. Grace was more interested in the chickens and the garden Willa had planted near the house, showing an early aptitude for growing things. Willa continued to read poetry, both to the children and to Nathan. Some evenings, the whole family would gather in the living room, and she would read aloud while Nathan and the kids listened, the words weaving them together in a tapestry of love and shared experience. The books on their shelves multiplied over the years, poetry and stories and histories that Willa collected like treasures. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Willa with a trip back to the cottonwood tree. Aunt Martha agreed to watch the children for the evening, and Nathan packed a picnic dinner for just the two of them. They rode out in the late afternoon, the November air cool and crisp, the leaves on the trees turning gold and red. The clearing looked smaller than Nathan remembered, but still beautiful. The cottonwood tree had grown, its branches spreading wider, and the grass was dormant for the winter, brown and dry. But the feeling of the place was the same, that sense of possibility and magic that had drawn them together all those years ago. They spread a blanket and ate their dinner as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Willa told Nathan about a new poem she had discovered, one that had made her think of him and their life together. Nathan told Willa about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to build something that Jacob and Grace could inherit and be proud of. "You have already done that," Willa said, touching his face. "You have given our children a legacy of hard work and integrity and love. That is worth more than any amount of land or cattle." "I could not have done any of it without you," Nathan said. "You made me believe I could be more than I was. You made me want to be better." "You were always good, Nathan Jameson," Willa said. "I just helped you see it." As darkness fell and the stars came out, Willa stood and opened the book she had brought with her. She read by the light of the lantern Nathan had set up, her voice carrying into the night the same way it had a decade before. But this time, she was not reading to the wind. She was reading to her husband, her audience, the man who had stopped to listen and had never left. When she finished, Nathan stood and took the book from her hands, setting it carefully on the blanket. He pulled her close, swaying with her in a slow dance under the stars, humming a tune that had no name but belonged entirely to them. "Thank you," he said, his lips close to her ear. "For what?" "For being my wife, for giving me children, for filling my life with beauty and words and love, for everything." Willa held him tighter, her face pressed against his chest. "You gave me all of that too. We gave it to each other." The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when Nathan worried about losing cattle, dry summers when the grass turned brown and brittle. There were illnesses that swept through the county, taking neighbors and friends. But through it all, Nathan and Willa held tight to each other and to the family they had built. Jacob grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as Nathan did. At 18, he was already taking on major responsibilities, managing the cattle and working alongside his father as an equal partner. Nathan watched his son with fierce pride, knowing that when the time came, the ranch would be in good hands. Grace, at 14, was her mother's daughter through and through. She loved reading and writing, filling journals with her own attempts at poetry and stories. Willa encouraged her, just as she had once encouraged herself, telling Grace that words had power and beauty and should never be dismissed as frivolous. In the fall of 1893, Willa announced that she was pregnant again. She was 40 years old, and the pregnancy was unexpected and slightly worrisome given her age. But she was healthy and strong, and the doctor saw no reason to be overly concerned. Nathan hovered more than ever, driving Willa to distraction with his constant worry, but she bore it with patience because she knew it came from love. Their third child, another son they named Henry, was born in the spring of 1894. He was a small baby, but he was healthy and strong-lunged, making his presence known from day one. Jacob and Grace adored their little brother, doting on him and fighting over who got to hold him. Nathan, now 42, found himself a father of 3 and could not quite believe how full his life had become. "We started with just us and a clearing in the grass," he said to Willa one evening as they watched their 3 children play in the yard. "Now look at what we have built." "We built a family," Willa said simply. "The best thing 2 people can build." As Henry grew, the ranch continued to thrive. Nathan and Jacob worked side by side, expanding the herd and improving the land. Grace helped her mother with the household and the garden, but she also spent hours in the small study Nathan had built for Willa, reading and writing and dreaming of the future. Aunt Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1897, just shy of her 80th birthday. Willa grieved deeply for the woman who had raised her and loved her and given her a home when she had nowhere else to go. The funeral was well attended, a testament to the respect and affection the community had for Martha. Nathan held Willa as she cried, reminding her that her aunt had lived a long, full life and had died knowing she was loved. The turn of the century brought changes to the country and to their lives. Jacob, now 22, announced his engagement to a sweet young woman named Emily who worked at the general store in town. The wedding was planned for the spring, and Nathan and Willa threw themselves into preparations, excited to see their son start his own family. Grace, at 17, was considering going to university, something that was still unusual for women but becoming more possible. Willa encouraged her daughter fiercely, even as Nathan worried about her going so far away. In the end, they decided Grace would attend a women's college in Kansas City, studying literature and education with the goal of becoming a teacher like her mother had been. Henry, at 6, was the baby of the family and everyone's favorite. He had his mother's way with words and his father's love of the land, a perfect blend of both his parents. He followed Jacob around the ranch, wanting to be just like his big brother, and sat in Grace's lap while she read to him, soaking up stories like a sponge. On a warm summer evening in 1901, Nathan and Willa sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. Jacob and Emily lived in a small house Nathan had built on the edge of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to give them privacy. Grace was home for the summer before her final year of college, and Henry was chasing fireflies in the yard, his laughter ringing out clear and joyful. "You ever think about that first day?" Willa asked, her hand in Nathan's. "Every day," Nathan said truthfully. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, to never stopping to listen. I think about how different my life would be without you." "I think about it too," Willa said. "I was so lonely back then, reading my poems to the wind because I had no one else to share them with. And then you appeared, like an answer to a question I had not even known I was asking." "I said I wanted to be your audience forever," Nathan reminded her. "I meant it then, and I mean it now." "You have been so much more than an audience," Willa said, turning to look at him. "You have been my partner, my love, my home. You gave me a family and a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We gave each other that," Nathan said, echoing words she had spoken years before. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their youngest child play and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The horses nickered in the barn, the cattle lowed in the distance, and from Jacob and Emily's house came the sound of Emily singing as she prepared dinner. "Read me something," Nathan said suddenly. "It has been too long since I heard you read." Willa smiled and went inside, returning with one of her worn poetry books. She settled back into her chair and opened to a page she had marked, clearing her throat before she began. Her voice was older now, a little rougher with age, but it still carried the same beauty and passion it had when she was a young woman reading to the wind. The poem was about a life well lived, about love that endured through trials and time, about building something lasting and true. As she read, the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, and Nathan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was what he had been searching for his whole life, even before he knew to search for it. This moment, this woman, this family, this life. When Willa finished reading, she closed the book and looked at Nathan with eyes that held decades of shared memories and deep, abiding love. "Forever," she said softly. "Forever," Nathan agreed, and he knew with absolute certainty that forever would never be long enough. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and sorrow. Jacob and Emily had 3 children of their own, giving Nathan and Willa grandchildren to spoil and love. Grace graduated from college and took a teaching position in Abilene, eventually marrying a kind schoolteacher named Robert. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who helped run the ranch and showed a talent for breeding horses. Nathan's hair turned gray, then white, and his hands became gnarled with arthritis, but he still worked the ranch every day, refusing to let age slow him down completely. Willa's eyes grew weaker, requiring spectacles for reading, but she still read aloud every evening, now to a house often full of grandchildren who clamored for her stories and poems. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 generations of Jamesons filled the house and yard, laughing and eating and sharing stories. Nathan looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life he had been given. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Nathan helped Willa into the wagon and drove her out to the cottonwood tree one more time. They were both moving slower now, their bodies worn from years of hard work and life, but their love was as strong as ever. The clearing was exactly as it had always been, timeless and peaceful. They sat together on a blanket, Willa leaning against Nathan's shoulder, and watched the stars come out one by one. 40 years, Nathan said wonderingly. 40 years since I stopped to listen to you read poetry. Best decision you ever made, Willa said with a smile. Best decision we ever made, Nathan corrected. You said yes when I asked to be your audience forever. How could I say no? Willa asked. You looked at me like I was something precious. No one had ever looked at me like that before. You are precious, Nathan said fiercely. You are the most precious thing in my life, Willa Jameson. You always have been and you always will be. Willa reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. And you are mine, my love, my partner, my forever audience. They sat in the clearing until the moon rose high overhead, talking about the past and the present and the future that stretched before their family. They talked about Jacob taking over the ranch completely, about Grace's growing family, about Henry's plans to expand the horse breeding operation. They talked about the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren that would surely come, about the legacy they were leaving behind. But mostly, they just sat together in the place where their love story had begun, grateful for every moment they had been given, every trial they had overcome together, every joy they had shared. The wind whispered through the grass, and if it carried words, they were words of love and promise and forever. As they rode back to the ranch in the soft moonlight, Nathan reached over and took Willa's hand. She laced her fingers through his, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and had built a life more beautiful than any poem ever written. The ranch house came into view, windows glowing with warm lamplight, and Nathan felt his heart swell with love and contentment. This was home. This was family. This was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dreamed possible. And it had all started with a cowboy who stopped to listen to a woman reading poems aloud to the wind, who had asked to be her audience forever, and who had been blessed beyond measure when she let him into her heart and her life. They lived out their days in peace and happiness, surrounded by family and the land they had worked so hard to build. When they were both gone, many years later they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones standing together like they had stood together in life. And if you visited that cottonwood tree where their story began, you might still hear echoes of poetry on the wind, words of love that transcended time and death and distance, a testament to the power of two people who found each other and chose each other every single day. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told their story for generations, about how Nathan had heard Willa reading poetry and had fallen in love on the spot, about how he had promised to be her audience forever, and had kept that promise through 46 years of marriage. It became a family legend, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes all you had to do was stop and listen, really listen, to find the person who would change your life forever. The ranch continued to thrive under Jacob's management and later under his children's stewardship. The house was added onto and modernized, but the small study where Willa had kept her poetry books remained unchanged, a shrine to her memory. Grace's children became teachers and writers, carrying on their grandmother's love of words and learning. Henry's horse breeding operation became renowned throughout Kansas, known for producing quality animals with gentle temperaments. But more than the material legacy, Nathan and Willa left behind a legacy of love and partnership, of two people who had supported each other through everything life threw at them, who had built something lasting and true from nothing more than words on the wind and a willingness to take a chance on each other. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest moments, that love is found not in grand gestures but in everyday choices to show up, to listen, to care, to commit. And somewhere in the Kansas plains, near an old cottonwood tree that still stands tall and proud, the wind continues to blow through the grass, carrying whispers of poetry and promises of forever, waiting for the next soul brave enough to stop and listen to what it has to say.